Dear Muslim, please understand that I am not attacking Muhammad or Muslims. In this video, I will be simply reading the Islamic sources and then asking you some brief questions for you to think about and for you to answer. In my previous video titled Why I Left Islam, I gave an example of the shocking, sexually immoral teachings of the Quran and Muhammad. I showed that the Islamic sources allowed Muslim soldiers to capture non-Muslim women in times of war. These women were already married, and their non-Muslim husbands were still alive. The Muslim soldiers desired to have sex with these women, so the Quran and Muhammad fulfilled their desires by forcing a divorce upon these weak, vulnerable, captured, married women. What was the end result of such an illegal divorce? Well, the Muslim soldiers were then given the go-ahead to marry these women and have sexual intercourse with them. Now that we know what Muhammad taught and allowed his Muslim soldiers to do to married captive women, let us find out what Muhammad himself did to such women in similar situations. Let's look at the Islamic sources and talk about Muhammad's marriage to a Jewish female war captive, whom he purchased through the slave trade. Her name was Safiya, and she was already married to a Jewish man named Kinana. We will see that one of the reasons why Muhammad married Safiya was because she was extremely sexually attractive. Additionally, some of the narrations say that she was the daughter of an important Jewish tribal leader. In Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 3, Hadith number 2235, narrated Anas bin Malik, the Prophet came to Khaybar, and when Allah made him victorious and he conquered the town by breaking the enemy's defense, the beauty of Safiya bint Huyay bin Akhtab was mentioned to him, and her husband had been killed while she was a bride. Allah's Messenger selected her for himself. عن أنس بن مالك قال: قدم النبي خيبر فلما فتح الله عليه الحصن ذكر له جمال صفية بنت حيي بن أخطب وقد قتل زوجها وكانت عروسا فاصطفاها رسول الله لنفسه. Now you may be wondering how Sophia's husband was killed. Well, as grotesque and as shocking as it will seem, Muhammad had her husband Kinana brutally tortured by using fire, and then he was beheaded. Muhammad married her shortly afterward. So to add insult to injury, not only did Muhammad take this man's life and his wife, but he took this Jewish man's wealth also, as we read in the book called Sirah Rasulillah, or the biography of the Messenger of Allah by Ibn Ishaq, on pages 514 and 515. Starting from the bottom we read, when the apostle, meaning Muhammad, had conquered Al-Qamus, the fort of Ibn Abu al-Huqayq, Safiya, who was the daughter of Huyay bin Akhtab, was brought to him along with another woman. Bilal, who was bringing them, led them past the Jews who were slain, and when the woman who was with Safiya saw them, she shrieked and slapped her face and poured dust on her head. When the apostle, meaning Muhammad, saw her, he said, "Take this she-devil away from me." He gave orders that Safiya was to be put behind him and threw his mantle over her, so the Muslims knew that he had chosen her for himself. If you read just a few lines down, it says about Safiya, she was the wife of Kinana ibn al-Rabi' ibn Abu al-Huqayq. Now let's continue reading where it says the rest of the affair of Khaybar. Kinana ibn al-Rabi', who had the custody of the treasure of Banu an-Nadir, was brought to the apostle, who asked him about it. He denied that he knew where it was. A Jew came to the apostle and said that he had seen Kinana going around a certain ruin every morning early. When the apostle, meaning Muhammad, said to Kinana, "Do you know that if we find you have it, I shall kill you?" He said yes. The apostle gave orders that the ruin was to be excavated, and some of the treasure was found. When he asked him about the rest, he refused to produce it. So the apostle, meaning Muhammad, gave orders to, quote, torture him until you extract what he has. So he kindled a fire with flint and steel on his chest until he was nearly dead. Then the apostle, meaning Muhammad, delivered him to Muhammad bin Maslama, and he struck off his head in revenge for his brother Mahmud. You just saw on page 515 of the biography that Kinana was also known as Ibn Abi al-Huqayq. So by reading the following hadith, we can match some important details and verify that Muhammad indeed had Kinana killed. In Sunan Abi Dawood, volume 3, hadith number 3006, we read the following. About 3/4 down the page we read, so Ibn Abi al-Huqayq was executed, and their women and children were taken captive. The Arabic says, فَقُتِلَ ابْنَ أَبِي الْحُقَيْقِ وَسُبِيَ نِسَاؤُهُمْ وَذَرَارِيُّهُمْ. And according to the webpage sunnah.com, this same hadith is classified as authentic or Hasan according to hadith scholar Al-Albani. Now, as I mentioned, Muhammad married Sophia shortly after he had her husband executed. But if you're not already disgusted, it's even more shocking to find out that Muhammad was also responsible for the execution of her father and brother. We read in the History of At-Tabari, volume 39, page 185, quote, while the Prophet was lying with Sophia, Abu Ayyub stayed the night at his door. When he saw the Prophet in the morning, he said, God is the greatest. He had a sword with him. He said to the Prophet, O Messenger of God, this young woman had just been married, and you killed her father, her brother, and her husband, so I did not trust her not to harm you. The Prophet laughed and said, Good. So it seems even Muhammad's companions were questioning such a marriage, and they feared for his safety, as no woman in her right mind would love a man who was responsible for the execution of her own family members. In fact, in one narration, it states that Sophia actually hated Muhammad. In a book called Dala'ilun Nubuwa by Imam al-Bayhaqi, volume 4, page 230, we read, quote, قالت وكان رسول الله من أبغض الناس إلي قتل زوجي وأبي فما زال يعتذر إلي, which means Sophia said, I hated the messenger of Allah more than any of the people. He had killed my husband and my father, therefore he kept apologizing to me. Additionally, we know that Muhammad purchased Sophia from a man named Dihya, who had already taken Sophia as his own female captive. Therefore, Muhammad purchased her through the slave trade. We read in Sunan Ibn Majah, volume 3, hadith number 2272, عن أنس أن النبي اشترى صفية بسبعة أرؤس. It was narrated from Anas that the Prophet bought Sophia for 7 slaves, and this hadith is sahih or authentic. قال عبد الرحمن من دحية الكلب. One of the narrators, Abdul Rahman, said, from Dihya al-Kalbi. Now, after reading about the story of Muhammad and Sophia in the biography and the supporting authentic narrations which validate that story, let me ask those of you who are Muslim or are considering converting to Islam, how do you feel about Muhammad's behavior? Do you honestly think that a woman whose husband, brother, and father were just killed would, within a couple of days or so, voluntarily choose to marry and have sex with the same man who was responsible for the deaths of her family members? I ask you to think hard and be honest with yourself. Thank you for watching. Peace.